Hello there, and welcome to Sleep Science Chronicles. Tonight we travel back through time itself to witness the long and extraordinary story of our planet. From a cloud of dust and gas to the living, breathing world beneath you now, Earth has been transforming for 4.5 billion years. And in that unimaginable stretch of time, it has been many different worlds. There was an Earth with no oxygen, where the sky glowed orange and the seas were green. There was an Earth locked in ice from pole to pole, a frozen marble drifting through space. There was an Earth so hot that rock flowed like water across its surface, and an Earth where giant insects filled the air, and forests stretched unbroken across entire continents. Tonight, we will drift through these ancient chapters. We will visit a young planet still glowing from its own formation. We will watch mountains rise and oceans form. We will witness the first stirrings of life in warm, shallow pools, and follow that life as it changed the very air and stone around it. Some of what we discover will feel familiar, like echoes of the world you know. Others will seem alien, as strange as any distant planet. But all of it happened here, beneath the same stars, on the same slowly spinning rock where you now rest. You don't need to remember every detail. Let these ancient stories wash over you like waves on a primordial shore. Let your breathing slow and your thoughts soften. The Earth has been patient for billions of years. It will wait for you to drift into sleep. If you enjoy these calm, curious explorations, and they help you unwind or spark a sense of wonder, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, let your body settle and your mind grow quiet. Let's begin. The Earth formed approximately 4.54 billion years ago. This number is not a guess or an estimate based on ancient texts. It comes from careful measurements of radioactive elements in the oldest rocks we can find, both on Earth and in meteorites that have fallen from space. These ancient stones carry within them a kind of clock, ticking away since the moment they solidified from molten material. By reading that clock, scientists have pinpointed our planet's birthday with remarkable precision. The Earth is old beyond easy comprehension, yet we know its age to within about 50 million years, a margin of error of roughly 1% across billions of years of history. Before the Earth existed, there was only a vast cloud of gas and dust drifting through space. This cloud was the remnant of older stars that had lived and died long before our sun was born. When those ancient stars exploded at the end of their lives, they scattered heavy elements into the void, elements like iron and silicon and oxygen that would one day become the bones of our planet. The Earth, in a very real sense, is made of stardust, recycled from generations of stellar ancestors whose light faded billions of years before our world took shape. The solar system began to form when part of this cloud started to collapse under its own gravity. Perhaps a nearby supernova sent a shockwave rippling through the region, nudging the gas and dust past a tipping point. Or perhaps the cloud simply grew dense enough on its own. Whatever the trigger, once the collapse began, it fed on itself. Matter fell inward, gathering speed, heating up as it compressed. At the center, temperatures rose until hydrogen atoms began to fuse, and a new star, our sun, flickered to life. Around that infant sun, a disk of leftover material continued to swirl. This disk contained everything that would not become part of the star itself, all the gas and dust and tiny grains of rock and ice spinning in a flattened ring. Within this disk, the story of the planets was about to begin. Grains collided and stuck together. Small clumps grew into larger ones. Over millions of years, These clumps became boulders, then mountains, then bodies large enough to have their own gravity pulling in yet more material. The early solar system was a violent place. Countless small bodies called planetesimals orbited the young sun, constantly colliding with one another. Some collisions shattered these objects into fragments. Others caused them to merge, growing larger with each impact. It was a slow-motion battle of accumulation, where the winners absorbed the losers and grew ever more massive. The Earth was one of these winners, a survivor of millions of years of cosmic collisions. The process by which planets grow from dust is called accretion. It is not a gentle gathering, but a violent one. Each collision released enormous energy, heating the growing planet. In the early stages, this heat escaped into space as quickly as it was generated. But as the proto-Earth grew larger, it began to trap that heat beneath its surface. The interior grew hotter and hotter, eventually reaching temperatures high enough to melt rock. The young Earth became a world of magma, glowing with its own inner fire. At some point during this chaotic period, something extraordinary happened. A body roughly the size of Mars, sometimes called Theia, collided with the young Earth. This was not a glancing blow, but a catastrophic impact, one of the most violent events in our planet's history. The collision was so powerful that it partially melted both worlds, sending vast quantities of molten rock spraying out into space. Much of Theia was absorbed into the Earth, but some of the debris remained in orbit. Over time, this orbiting material coalesced into a new body. That body was the Moon. The moon-forming impact happened approximately 4.5 billion years ago, within the first 100 million years of Earth's existence. The evidence for this giant collision comes from many sources. The Moon's composition is remarkably similar to Earth's outer layers, as if it were made from the same material. The Earth-Moon system has an unusual amount of angular momentum, consistent with a massive off-center impact. And computer simulations of such a collision produce results that match what we observe today. The Moon is not a captured asteroid or a piece of the Earth that spun off on its own. It is the child of a cosmic catastrophe. In the immediate aftermath of the giant impact, the Earth was transformed into something almost unrecognizable. The collision released enough energy to melt the entire outer portion of the planet, creating a global ocean of magma hundreds of kilometers deep. The surface glowed with the dull red light of molten rock. There was no solid ground anywhere, no continents, no ocean basins, just an endless sea of liquid stone, slowly cooling under a sky filled with the debris of impact. The newly formed Moon orbited much closer to Earth than it does today, perhaps only about 15,000 miles away, compared to its current distance of nearly 250,000 miles. Hanging huge in the sky, it would have dominated the view from the molten surface below. The gravitational interaction between Earth and Moon was intense, creating enormous tides in the magma ocean and slowly pushing the Moon farther away. This process continues even now. The Moon drifts about 1.5 inches farther from Earth each year, a patient retreat that has been ongoing for billions of years. The Earth's early atmosphere was nothing like the air you breathe tonight. There was no oxygen, no nitrogen-rich sky stretching blue overhead. Instead, the atmosphere was thick with carbon dioxide, water vapor, and other gases released by volcanic activity, and the constant bombardment of space debris. The sky may have appeared orange or reddish, colored by the chemical haze that filled it. Breathing this air would have been impossible for any life form we know. It was a poisonous blanket wrapped around a world of fire. As the Earth slowly cooled, its interior began to separate into distinct layers. Denser materials like iron and nickel sank toward the center, forming the core. Lighter materials floated upward, eventually becoming the rocky mantle and crust. This process, called differentiation, transformed the Earth from a relatively uniform ball of mixed material into the layered planet we know today. The iron core, the rocky mantle, the thin outer crust, all took shape during these early times, as gravity sorted the planet's ingredients by density. The Earth's core is divided into two parts. The inner core is a solid ball of iron and nickel, roughly the size of the Moon, sitting at the very center of the planet. Despite temperatures exceeding 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the Sun, the inner core remains solid because of the immense pressure bearing down upon it. Surrounding this solid center is the outer core, a churning ocean of liquid metal thousands of miles thick. It is the motion of this liquid iron that generates Earth's magnetic field, an invisible shield that protects us from the harsh radiation of space. The Earth's magnetic field extends far out into space, creating a protective bubble called the magnetosphere. This bubble deflects most of the charged particles streaming from the Sun, particles that would otherwise strip away our atmosphere and bombard the surface with harmful radiation. Mars once had a magnetic field, but it faded billions of years ago. Without that protection, the Martian atmosphere was slowly blown away by the solar wind, leaving a cold, barren world. Earth's magnetic field is one of the reasons our planet remains habitable. The cooling of Earth's surface happened relatively quickly by geological standards. Within perhaps 200 million years of the Moon-forming impact, the magma ocean had solidified into a thin crust of rock. This early crust was probably nothing like the continents we know today. It may have been made primarily of dark volcanic rock, constantly recycled by the churning mantle below. Any piece of that original crust would have been subducted, melted, and reformed many times over. The oldest rocks on Earth today are not remnants of that first crust, but younger formations, though still unimaginably ancient. The oldest known minerals on Earth are tiny crystals of zircon found in Western Australia. These microscopic grains are approximately 4.4 billion years old, formed within the first 150 million years of Earth's existence. Zircon is remarkably durable, capable of surviving conditions that would destroy most minerals. These ancient crystals have been eroded from their original rocks, transported by water, buried, heated, and compressed, yet they retain a record of the conditions under which they first formed. They are tiny time capsules from a world almost unimaginably different from our own. Analysis of these ancient zircons suggests that liquid water may have existed on Earth's surface far earlier than scientists once believed. The chemistry of the crystals indicates they formed in the presence of water, implying that oceans, or at least large bodies of water, may have been present within a few 100 million years of the planet's formation. This is surprising because the early Earth was so hot and so frequently bombarded by asteroids that liquid water might seem impossible. Yet the evidence suggests that our planet's oceans are nearly as old as the planet itself. The period from about 4.1 to 3.8 billion years ago is called the Late Heavy Bombardment. During this time, the inner solar system was pummeled by an intense barrage of asteroids and comets. The Moon's heavily cratered surface preserves a record of this violent era, impacts frozen in stone, because the Moon has no atmosphere or plate tectonics to erase them. Earth would have been struck by far more and larger objects than the Moon, impacts powerful enough to vaporize oceans and sterilize the surface. If life had emerged before the bombardment, it may have been wiped out, only to begin again once the chaos subsided. Some scientists believe the water in Earth's oceans was delivered by comets and asteroids during the late heavy bombardment and earlier periods of impact. These objects contain significant amounts of water ice, and the cumulative effect of countless impacts over hundreds of millions of years could have supplied enough water to fill the oceans. Others argue that much of Earth's water was present from the beginning, trapped in the minerals that formed the planet, and gradually released through volcanic activity. The truth may be a combination of both sources, water from the sky and water from the stone. The early oceans were not blue but likely greenish or even brownish, colored by dissolved iron and other minerals. The chemistry of seawater was very different from today, more acidic and rich in metals that have since been locked away in rocks. There were no white sandy beaches, no coral reefs, no fish swimming in the depths. The seas were hot, perhaps near boiling in some places, heated by volcanic activity, and the still cooling earth beneath. Yet these strange, inhospitable waters were the cradle of all life to come. Volcanic activity was far more intense on the early Earth than it is today. The interior was hotter, the crust was thinner, and magma found its way to the surface in countless locations around the globe. Great volcanic provinces spewed lava across thousands of square miles. Plumes of hot rock rose from deep in the mantle, punching through the crust to create chains of volcanic islands. The atmosphere was constantly replenished with gases from these eruptions, including the water vapor that would condense to fill the oceans and the carbon dioxide that would warm the planet. The early Earth experienced what scientists call a runaway greenhouse effect, though not quite as extreme as the one that transformed Venus into an inferno. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere trapped heat from the sun, keeping surface temperatures elevated. This warmth was actually helpful in the planet's youth, because the sun was about 30% dimmer than it is today. Without greenhouse gases to trap additional heat, the early Earth might have been a frozen world, its oceans locked in ice. The same gases that would later need to be regulated were essential in keeping the young planet warm enough for liquid water to exist. One of the great mysteries of Earth's early history is called the faint, young sun paradox. 4 billion years ago, the sun produced significantly less energy than it does now. Based on this reduced solar output, calculations suggest the Earth should have been frozen solid, a snowball drifting through space. Yet geological evidence shows liquid water was present, and life emerged relatively quickly. Something must have kept the planet warm, most likely a combination of greenhouse gases far more concentrated than today, and possibly other factors we do not yet fully understand. The earliest solid evidence of life on Earth dates to approximately 3.5 billion years ago. In Western Australia and South Africa, ancient rocks contain structures called stromatolites, layered formations created by communities of microorganisms. These same structures are still formed today by bacterial mats in a few shallow, salty environments. The ancient stromatolites tell us that life was already established, already building reefs of its own, more than 3 billion years before the first dinosaur walked the Earth. Some researchers claim to have found evidence of life even earlier, in rocks dating to 3.8 or even 4.1 billion years old. These claims are controversial because the rocks have been so altered by heat and pressure over the eons that distinguishing biological signatures from non-biological chemical processes is extremely difficult. If these early dates are correct, life emerged almost as soon as conditions allowed, within just a few 100 million years of the Earth's formation. This would suggest that the origin of life, given the right conditions, may be relatively easy, a natural consequence of chemistry rather than a rare accident. The first living things were single-celled organisms, far simpler than any cell in your body. They had no nucleus, No complex internal structures, just a membrane surrounding the basic machinery of life. These organisms are called prokaryotes, and their descendants still exist today as bacteria and archaea. For billions of years, they were the only life on Earth. Everything else, every plant, every animal, every fungus, would eventually evolve from these humble beginnings. Life may have originated in several possible environments. One leading theory places the origin of life at hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, where hot, mineral-rich water seeps up from the Earth's interior. These vents provide a constant supply of chemical energy and create gradients of temperature and chemistry that could drive the reactions necessary for life. Another theory suggests life began in shallow pools on land, where cycles of wetting and drying could concentrate organic molecules and drive chemical evolution. A third possibility involves ice, where freezing could concentrate molecules in liquid pockets and protect fragile chemical structures from destruction. The chemistry of life is based on carbon, an element with a remarkable ability to form complex molecules. Carbon atoms can bond with each other in long chains and rings, creating the scaffolding for proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. This complexity is possible because of carbon's unique position in the periodic table, with 4 electrons available for bonding, allowing it to form stable connections with many other elements. Silicon, often suggested as an alternative basis for life, shares some of these properties, but is less versatile. Carbon-based life may be the only kind possible, or it may simply be the kind that emerged first here on Earth. The building blocks of life, amino acids and simple organic molecules, are not unique to Earth. They have been found in meteorites that have fallen from space, in comets, and in the clouds of gas surrounding newborn stars. This suggests that the raw materials for life are common throughout the universe, assembled by ordinary chemical processes wherever conditions allow. The step from these simple building blocks to a living cell remains a mystery, but the ingredients are everywhere. One of the most important molecules for life is DNA, the double helix that carries genetic information from generation to generation. DNA is made of 4 chemical bases arranged in pairs along a twisted ladder. The sequence of these bases encodes the instructions for building proteins, the molecular machines that do almost everything in a cell. But DNA is too complex to have been the first genetic molecule. Many scientists believe that RNA, a simpler relative of DNA, came first. RNA can both store genetic information and catalyze chemical reactions, a dual role that makes it a plausible starting point for life. The RNA world hypothesis suggests that early life was based entirely on RNA, before DNA and proteins evolved. In this scenario, self-replicating RNA molecules underwent a kind of chemical natural selection, with more successful variants outcompeting less successful ones. Over time, this competition led to increasing complexity, eventually giving rise to cells with the DNA and protein machinery we see today. Evidence for the RNA world comes from the many roles RNA still plays in modern cells, including some that seem like relics of an earlier era. For hundreds of millions of years, life remained microscopic and simple. Single-celled organisms floated in the ancient seas, dividing and multiplying, evolving slowly in response to their environment. There were no predators and no prey in the modern sense, just countless tiny cells competing for resources in a world without oxygen. This era of microbial dominance lasted longer than all subsequent history combined. If Earth's timeline were compressed into a single year, complex multicellular life would not appear until mid-November. The early Earth had almost no free oxygen in its atmosphere. Oxygen is a highly reactive gas that combines readily with other elements, and any oxygen released by geological processes was quickly absorbed by iron and other materials. The air was instead dominated by nitrogen, carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor. For anaerobic organisms, those that do not require oxygen, this was no problem. But the lack of oxygen meant there was no ozone layer to block ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Life was largely confined to the water, where it was shielded from the harsh rays. Everything changed with the evolution of photosynthesis. Somewhere around 3.5 billion years ago, or perhaps earlier, certain microorganisms developed the ability to capture energy from sunlight and use it to build organic molecules. The most significant form of photosynthesis, the kind used by plants today, splits water molecules and releases oxygen as a waste product. When this oxygen-producing photosynthesis evolved, it set in motion one of the most dramatic transformations in Earth's history. The organisms responsible for oxygenating the Earth were cyanobacteria, sometimes called blue-green algae, though they are not truly algae at all. These tiny cells were the first to master the trick of using water and sunlight to power their metabolism, exhaling oxygen as a byproduct. Cyanobacteria are still abundant today, found in oceans, lakes, and even on damp rocks. They are among the most successful organisms in Earth's history, having shaped the planet's chemistry in ways that made all subsequent life possible. At first, the oxygen produced by cyanobacteria did not accumulate in the atmosphere. Instead, it reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans, forming rust that sank to the seafloor. These deposits became the banded iron formations that are found on every continent, layers of iron-rich rock that record the gradual oxygenation of the seas. The banding pattern suggests that oxygen levels rose and fell over time, perhaps as cyanobacteria bloomed and then died back. This tug-of-war between oxygen production and consumption lasted for hundreds of millions of years. The Great Oxygenation Event, sometimes called the oxygen catastrophe, occurred approximately 2.4 billion years ago. By this time, the ocean's capacity to absorb oxygen had been exhausted. Iron had been oxidized, sulfur compounds had been converted, and there was nowhere left for the oxygen to go except into the atmosphere. Oxygen levels began to rise dramatically, eventually reaching a few percent of the atmosphere. For organisms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world, this was a disaster. Oxygen is toxic to many anaerobic life forms, and the Great Oxygenation Event may have caused the first mass extinction in Earth's history. The rise of oxygen had another profound consequence. High in the atmosphere, oxygen molecules were broken apart by ultraviolet radiation and recombined to form ozone. This ozone layer began to block much of the harmful UV radiation from reaching the surface. For the first time, life could potentially survive on land without being damaged by the sun. The ozone shield was not thick enough for complex land life for another 2 billion years, but its formation was a crucial step toward the world we know. After the Great Oxygenation Event, oxygen levels did not continue rising steadily. Instead, they fluctuated, sometimes dropping back to very low levels. The middle portion of Earth's history, from about 1.8 to 0.8 billion years ago, is sometimes called the boring billion, because relatively little seems to have changed during this vast stretch of time. Oxygen remained low, life remained mostly single-celled, and the planet entered a long period of relative stability. But beneath this apparent monotony, the foundations for future complexity were slowly being laid. One of the most important events in the history of life occurred during this outwardly quiet period. A larger cell engulfed a smaller one, but instead of digesting it, the two formed a partnership. The smaller cell, probably a bacterium capable of using oxygen for energy, became a permanent resident inside the larger cell. Over time, it evolved into the mitochondrion, the powerhouse found in almost every complex cell today. This event, called endosymbiosis, was the origin of eukaryotic cells, the type of cell that makes up all plants, animals, fungi, and many other organisms. The evidence for endosymbiosis is written in your cells right now. Mitochondria have their own DNA, separate from the DNA in the cell's nucleus. This mitochondrial DNA is circular, like bacterial DNA, and the genes it contains are similar to those of certain free-living bacteria. Mitochondria also reproduce by dividing, much like bacteria do. They are not just parts of your cells. They are the descendants of ancient bacteria that gave up their independence billions of years ago to become permanent partners in a larger enterprise. A similar event gave rise to the chloroplasts found in plant cells. Another bacterium, this one capable of photosynthesis, was engulfed and retained by a host cell. The descendant of this union became the ancestor of all plants and algae. Chloroplasts, like mitochondria, have their own DNA and reproduce independently within cells. They are the remnants of cyanobacteria, the same organisms that first oxygenated the atmosphere, now living inside the cells of every plant on Earth. The evolution of complex eukaryotic cells opened the door to multicellular life. Single-celled organisms can only grow so large before they run into problems with diffusion and structural support. But cells that could cooperate and specialize could build bodies of almost unlimited size and complexity. The transition to multicellularity happened independently many times in the history of life, in animals, plants, fungi, and several groups of algae. Each time, single cells found advantages in sticking together and dividing labor among themselves. Approximately 720 million years ago, the Earth entered one of the most extreme climate episodes in its history. Ice sheets spread from the poles toward the equator, eventually covering the entire planet in a shell of frozen water. This was Snowball Earth, a period when the planet's surface temperature may have dropped to -50 degrees Celsius, and the oceans froze to a depth of a kilometer or more. The Earth became a white ball reflecting most of the sun's light back into space, locked in a frozen state that seemed impossible to escape. The trigger for Snowball Earth may have been the arrangement of the continents. At the time, most land masses were clustered near the equator, where weathering of rocks was most intense. This weathering absorbed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, reducing the greenhouse effect and allowing temperatures to drop. Once ice began to spread, it reflected more sunlight, cooling the planet further in a runaway feedback loop. The Earth had frozen itself, trapped in a prison of its own making. Life survived the Snowball Earth episodes in refuges where conditions remained tolerable. Hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor continued to pump out warm, mineral-rich water. Cracks in the ice may have allowed some light to reach liquid water beneath. Volcanic hot springs on land provided pockets of warmth. The survivors of this frozen hell were the ancestors of all complex life to come. The snowball was a filter, selecting for organisms tough enough to endure the worst conditions Earth had ever inflicted on its inhabitants. There may have been multiple Snowball Earth events, perhaps 2 or 3 major glaciations between about 720 and 635 million years ago. Each time, the planet froze nearly solid, and each time it eventually escaped. The evidence for these events comes from glacial deposits found on every continent, even in regions that were near the equator at the time. Rocks scraped and scored by moving ice lie in places that should have been tropical. The Earth, it seems, has a talent for extremes. The snowball Earth eventually ended because volcanoes kept erupting even as the surface froze. Carbon dioxide accumulated in the atmosphere since there was no exposed rock or liquid water to absorb it. After millions of years, greenhouse warming finally overcame the reflective power of the ice. The thaw, when it came, was rapid and extreme. Temperatures may have swung from far below freezing to well above modern levels in just a few thousand years. The Earth went from icehouse to greenhouse in a geological instant. The aftermath of the snowball was a world transformed. Nutrients that had been locked in ice were released into the oceans. Oxygen levels began to rise again. And life, having survived the crucible of global glaciation, began to experiment with new forms. The stage was set for the most dramatic biological revolution since the origin of life itself. Something remarkable was about to happen in the ancient seas. After the snowball, life exploded in diversity. The Ediacaran period, from about 635 to 538 million years ago, saw the first large, complex organisms. These creatures were unlike anything alive today, soft-bodied and strange, lying flat on the seafloor or standing upright like quilted fronds. They had no eyes, no mouths, no obvious means of locomotion. Some may have absorbed nutrients directly from the water. Others may have hosted symbiotic microbes. The Ediacaran biota remains mysterious, a failed experiment or perhaps the root of all animal life. Dickinsonia was one of the most distinctive Ediacaran organisms. It looked like a ribbed oval mat, sometimes reaching over a meter in length, resting on the seafloor. For decades, scientists debated what kind of creature it was, or whether it was even an animal at all. Recent analysis of fossil biomarkers suggests it was indeed an animal, making it one of the oldest known members of our kingdom. Yet Dickinsonia has no clear descendants. It represents a way of being alive that the world has since forgotten. Other Ediacaran creatures were equally enigmatic. Charnia resembled a fern frond anchored to the seafloor, swaying in currents too deep for photosynthesis. Tribrachidium had threefold symmetry, unlike the bilateral or radial symmetry of most modern animals. Kimberella may have been a primitive mollusk, one of the few Ediacaran forms that might connect to later animal groups. These organisms lived in a world without predators, growing large and soft in the dim light of the ancient ocean floor. The Ediacaran world was a quiet one by later standards. There were no predators tearing through the water, no shells or teeth, no evolutionary arms race of attack and defense. Organisms seemed to coexist peacefully, growing large and soft without fear of being eaten. This tranquility would not last. Something was about to change, a shift that would transform life on Earth more dramatically than anything since the origin of photosynthesis. The Cambrian explosion began approximately 538 million years ago and lasted for perhaps 25 million years. During this relatively brief period, almost all the major animal groups that exist today appeared in the fossil record for the first time. Animals with eyes, with shells, with claws and teeth and segmented bodies, burst onto the scene in a riot of evolutionary innovation. The pace of change was unprecedented. More new body plans evolved in this one period than in all the time since. The trigger for the Cambrian explosion remains debated. Rising oxygen levels may have allowed animals to grow larger and more active. The evolution of eyes may have started an arms race between predators and prey. The development of hard shells may have been a response to new threats. Perhaps the genetic toolkit for building complex bodies had finally matured. Or perhaps it was a combination of all these factors, a perfect storm of evolutionary opportunity. Eyes were one of the most important innovations of the Cambrian. Before this period, the ocean was effectively blind. Organisms might sense light and dark, but they could not form images or track movement. The evolution of complex eyes changed everything. Suddenly, predators could spot prey from a distance. Prey could see predators approaching. The visual arms race had begun, driving rapid evolution of camouflage, speed, armor, and evasive behavior. The world became a more dangerous place, but also a more interesting one. The first eyes may have been simple, light-sensitive patches, clusters of cells that could detect the direction of incoming light. From these modest beginnings, evolution crafted compound eyes with thousands of lenses, camera eyes with adjustable focus, and mirror eyes that use reflection to form images. The Cambrian seas saw the emergence of all these designs, experiments in vision that would shape the course of animal evolution for the next 500 million years. Among the strangest creatures of the Cambrian was Anomalocaris, a predator that could reach lengths of over a meter, a giant in a world of small creatures. It had large compound eyes, grasping appendages near its mouth, and a circular jaw lined with tooth-like plates. Anomalocaris was the apex predator of its time, hunting trilobites and other animals across the Cambrian seafloor. Its fossils were so bizarre that for years scientists thought they belonged to 3 different creatures: a shrimp, a jellyfish, and a sea cucumber. Trilobites were among the most successful animals of the Paleozoic era, the great span of time from the Cambrian to the Permian. These armored arthropods scuttled across the ocean floor for over 270 million years, evolving into thousands of species. Some were tiny, smaller than a grain of rice. Others reached lengths of over 2 feet. They had some of the earliest complex eyes in the fossil record, made of crystalline calcite lenses that could see in multiple directions at once. Trilobites survived several mass extinctions before finally disappearing about 252 million years ago. The eyes of trilobites were remarkable structures. Unlike the soft, protein-based lenses of most modern eyes, trilobite lenses were made of mineral calcite. Each lens was a tiny crystal, precisely oriented to minimize distortion. Some trilobite eyes had thousands of these lenses packed together, providing a wide field of view. Others had fewer, larger lenses optimized for low-light conditions. A few species had eyes mounted on stalks, allowing them to peer above the sediment, while their bodies remained hidden. Hallucigenia was another Cambrian oddity, a worm-like creature with 7 pairs of spines along its back and 7 pairs of tentacle-like legs beneath. When first discovered, scientists reconstructed it upside down, with the spines as legs and the legs as tentacles. It took decades to realize the mistake. Even correctly oriented, Hallucigenia looks like something from a fever dream, a creature that challenges our assumptions about what an animal should look like. Opabinia had 5 eyes arranged across its head, and a long, flexible proboscis tipped with grasping spines. When its reconstruction was first presented at a scientific conference, the audience reportedly burst into laughter, unable to believe such a creature could have existed. Yet Opabinia was real, swimming through Cambrian seas over 500 million years ago. It reminds us that evolution has explored possibilities far stranger than anything we might imagine. The Cambrian seafloor was a strange place by modern standards. There were no fish, no sharks, no whales or dolphins. The water was filled instead with creatures that seem half familiar and half alien. Worms with legs, arthropods with countless appendages, animals whose affinities remain unclear even after decades of study. The Burgess Shale in Canada and similar deposits around the world preserve these soft-bodied organisms in exquisite detail, windows into a world that has otherwise been lost to time. The Burgess Shale was discovered in 1909 by Charles Walcott, a paleontologist who stumbled upon it high in the Canadian Rockies. Over the following years, Walcott collected tens of thousands of fossils, many of them representing animals unknown from anywhere else. The exceptional preservation of the Burgess Shale occurred because fine mud buried the creatures quickly, before they could decay or be scavenged. The result is a snapshot of Cambrian life in astonishing detail, down to the outlines of soft tissues and internal organs. Similar fossil sites have since been discovered around the world. The Chengjiang fauna in China predates the Burgess Shale by about 10 million years and contains equally remarkable specimens. The Sirius Passet in Greenland and the Emu Bay Shale in Australia offer additional windows into Cambrian diversity. Each site reveals slightly different communities, adapted to different environments, yet all share the same explosion of body plans and ecological strategies. Life remained almost entirely in the water for the first 4 billion years of Earth's history. The land was barren, scoured by ultraviolet radiation and lacking the complex ecosystems needed to support large organisms. The continents were deserts of bare rock and sand, visited occasionally by rain, but hosting no permanent residents. The silence of the land would persist for hundreds of millions of years after the Cambrian explosion filled the seas with life. By about 470 million years ago, simple plants, probably related to modern liverworts and mosses, began to colonize the edges of lakes and streams. These pioneers had no roots, no leaves, no flowers. They hugged the ground and stayed moist, spreading slowly across damp rocks and muddy shores. They were small and unassuming, but they had taken the first step onto a new frontier. The greening of the land had begun. The earliest land plants faced formidable challenges. Without water surrounding them, they risked drying out. They needed new ways to support themselves against gravity. They had to obtain nutrients from rock rather than dissolved seawater. And they had to protect themselves from the harsh, ultraviolet radiation that still penetrated the thin ozone layer. Each of these challenges was eventually solved, but the solutions took millions of years to evolve. One of the key innovations was the cuticle, a waxy coating that reduced water loss from plant surfaces. Another was the evolution of stomata, tiny pores that could open and close to regulate gas exchange while minimizing desiccation. Vascular tissue allowed plants to transport water and nutrients from one part of the body to another, enabling them to grow taller. Each innovation built upon the last, gradually transforming simple green mats into the complex plants we know today. The colonization of land by plants transformed the Earth's surface. Roots broke apart rocks, accelerating weathering and releasing nutrients. Decaying plant material formed the first true soils, dark with organic matter and teeming with microbial life. Oxygen levels rose as photosynthesis expanded onto land. The stage was set for animals to follow, first invertebrates like millipedes and early insects, then later vertebrates that would give rise to all land-dwelling backboned creatures, including, eventually, us. The first animals to venture onto land were probably arthropods, the group that includes insects, spiders, and crustaceans. Millipede-like creatures left trackways in wet sand over 450 million years ago, venturing onto beaches and riverbanks before retreating to the water. True land-dwelling arthropods appeared by about 430 million years ago, small detritivores feeding on the thin layer of dead plant material that was beginning to accumulate. They were not impressive by modern standards, but they were pioneers. Early land arthropods had to solve the same problems as plants, and more. They needed waterproof coverings to prevent desiccation. They needed new respiratory systems to extract oxygen from air rather than water. They needed stronger skeletons to support their bodies without the buoyancy of water, and they needed to find food and mates in a landscape that was still mostly barren. The solutions they evolved would serve their descendants for hundreds of millions of years. The first forests appeared in the Devonian period, around 385 million years ago. These were not forests of towering oaks or pines, but strange groves of plants that no longer exist. Archaeopteris, one of the earliest true trees, could reach heights of over 30 meters. It had a woody trunk and fern-like leaves, combining features that would later be separated into different plant groups. The spread of these forests further accelerated the weathering of rocks and the removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Watieza was one of the earliest known trees, its fossils found in what is now New York State. It looked like a giant fern or palm, with a trunk topped by a crown of frond-like branches. Watieza forests grew in swampy lowlands, their roots stabilizing the soil and their fallen debris accumulating in thick layers. These early forests were not dense or diverse by modern standards, but they represented a revolution in the structure of terrestrial ecosystems. The evolution of trees changed the planet's climate. Forests drew down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, locking carbon in wood and soil. The weathering of rocks accelerated as roots broke stone and released acids. Both processes removed greenhouse gases from the air, cooling the planet over millions of years. The spread of forests in the Devonian may have contributed to a series of extinctions at the end of that period, as the world grew colder and ocean chemistry changed. Fish evolved and diversified during the Silurian and Devonian periods, earning the latter the nickname, the Age of Fishes. The seas teemed with armored fish whose bony plates covered their heads and shoulders. Sharks appeared, their skeletons made of cartilage rather than bone, their bodies streamlined for speed and efficiency. The oceans became more dangerous and more complex, as predators and prey evolved in an endless dance of adaptation. Dunkleosteus was one of the most fearsome predators of the Devonian seas. This armored fish could reach lengths of over 6 meters, with a massive head encased in bony plates. Instead of teeth, Dunkleosteus had sharp, bony ridges that formed a self-sharpening bite, capable of crushing the shells of any prey. Its jaw could snap shut with tremendous force, making it one of the most powerful biters in the history of life. Dunkleosteus ruled the Devonian oceans for millions of years before disappearing in the extinction at the period's end. The most important development for the future of life on land was the evolution of lobe-finned fish, creatures with muscular fins supported by bones that could bear weight. These fins were not like the thin, ray-supported fins of most modern fish. They were thick and fleshy, with an internal skeleton that resembled the limb bones of land animals. From these fish, the first four-legged vertebrates, the tetrapods, would eventually evolve. The transition from water to land was not a single event, but a gradual process spanning millions of years. Fossils like Tiktaalik, discovered in the Canadian Arctic, show animals partway through this transition, with fish-like bodies, but limb-like fins, and necks that could move independently of their bodies. These creatures probably lived in shallow water, using their strong fins to prop themselves up, and perhaps to make short excursions onto land. Full commitment to terrestrial life would come later. Tiktaalik was discovered in 2004, after researchers deliberately searched for rocks of the right age and environment to contain transitional fossils. The prediction paid off spectacularly. Tiktaalik had scales and fins like a fish, but also a flat head, a neck, and wrist bones like a land animal. It could do push-ups with its front fins, and probably spent time in the shallows, perhaps hunting in water too shallow for other predators. Tiktaalik is one of the most important transitional fossils ever found. Acanthostega and Ichthyostega were early tetrapods that lived about 365 million years ago. They had 4 legs with fingers and toes, but they were not yet fully adapted to life on land. Their limbs were more like paddles than walking legs, and they retained fish-like features, including internal gills. These animals probably lived mostly in water, using their limbs to navigate through vegetation in shallow swamps. True land-dwelling vertebrates would not appear for millions of years. The earliest tetrapods had more than 5 fingers and toes. Acanthostega had 8 fingers on each hand. Ichthyostega had 7 toes. The number 5 that characterizes most modern tetrapods, including humans, evolved later as a kind of developmental constraint. Once the 5-digit pattern was established, it proved remarkably stable. Nearly all land vertebrates, from frogs to birds to whales, have limbs based on the same fundamental 5-fingered design, even when those limbs have been modified into wings or flippers. Approximately 359 million years ago, at the end of the Devonian period, a mass extinction struck the Earth. Marine life was hit especially hard, with many reef-building organisms and fish species disappearing. The causes remain unclear, but possibilities include climate change, changes in sea level, and the spread of land plants, whose roots may have released nutrients into the oceans, triggering algal blooms that depleted oxygen. This was one of the Big 5 mass extinctions, events that periodically reset the course of evolution. The Carboniferous period that followed the Devonian was a time of lush, swampy forests and giant insects. The name Carboniferous means coal-bearing, and this period produced the vast majority of the coal deposits that would later fuel the Industrial Revolution. Forests of giant club mosses, horsetails, and ferns covered the tropical regions, growing in swamps where dead vegetation accumulated faster than it could decay. Oxygen levels climbed to around 35% of the atmosphere during the Carboniferous, compared to 21% today. This oxygen-rich air allowed insects to grow to enormous sizes, since their respiratory systems work differently from ours. Insects breathe through a network of tubes called tracheae, which deliver oxygen directly to their tissues. The efficiency of this system depends on oxygen concentration, and the high levels of the Carboniferous removed the usual size constraints. Dragonflies with wingspans of over 2 feet patrolled the skies of the Carboniferous. Meganeura, the largest known flying insect, was a predator that hunted other insects and possibly small vertebrates. Its wings were similar in structure to modern dragonfly wings, suggesting that the basic design has remained successful for over 300 million years. When you watch a dragonfly hover over a pond today, you are seeing a body plan that evolved in the coal swamps of the Carboniferous. Millipedes as long as cars crawled through the undergrowth of Carboniferous forests. Arthropleura could reach lengths of over 2 meters, making it one of the largest land invertebrates ever to exist. Despite its size, it was probably a detritivore, feeding on dead plant material on the forest floor. Its trackways have been found preserved in ancient rocks, long parallel grooves left by its many legs as it moved through the vegetation. Amphibians diversified during the Carboniferous, becoming the dominant land vertebrates for a time. Some grew to impressive sizes, with predators like Eriops reaching lengths of over 2 meters. These early amphibians were not the small, moist creatures we associate with the group today. They were robust, powerful animals, some of them armored with bony scales. They ruled the swamps and forests until the rise of the reptiles. The coal deposits that power much of modern civilization were formed during the Carboniferous period. Vast swamps covered much of the tropical regions, and when the trees and other plants in these swamps died, they fell into the stagnant water. The lack of oxygen prevented complete decomposition, and layer upon layer of plant material accumulated over millions of years. Eventually, This material was buried, compressed, and heated, transforming into the coal seams that miners extract today. One reason so much plant material accumulated was that the microorganisms capable of breaking down wood had not yet fully evolved. Lignin, the tough compound that makes wood rigid, was a relatively new evolutionary invention, and the fungi and bacteria that would eventually specialize in decomposing it were still catching up. For tens of millions of years, dead trees piled up faster than they could rot, creating the conditions for coal formation on a massive scale. When we burn coal, we are releasing sunlight captured by Carboniferous forests over 300 million years ago. The energy that powered those ancient swamps came from the sun, was stored in plant tissues, and has remained locked underground ever since. In burning it, we are completing a process that began before the dinosaurs existed, releasing carbon that has been out of the atmosphere for longer than complex life has walked on land. The Carboniferous also saw the evolution of the first reptiles, animals that could reproduce entirely on land. Unlike amphibians, which typically lay eggs in water and have aquatic larvae, reptiles developed the amniotic egg, a self-contained package with a shell and membranes that protected the developing embryo from drying out. This innovation freed reptiles from dependence on water for reproduction, allowing them to colonize habitats that were off-limits to amphibians. Hylonomus, discovered in fossilized tree stumps in Nova Scotia, is one of the earliest known reptiles, dating to about 312 million years ago. It was a small, lizard-like animal, probably feeding on insects and other invertebrates. Hylonomus and its relatives were not dominant during the Carboniferous, but they carried within them the potential to take over the world. Their descendants would include the dinosaurs, the mammals, and eventually us. Around 335 million years ago, all the continents began to come together into a single supercontinent called Pangaea, meaning all lands. This was not the first time the continents had assembled into a supercontinent, nor would it be the last. But Pangaea would have profound effects on climate, ocean circulation, and the evolution of life. By about 270 million years ago, Pangaea was fully assembled, a massive landmass stretching from pole to pole. The interior of Pangaea was far from any ocean, creating vast deserts with extreme temperatures. Coastal regions could be lush and humid, but the heart of the supercontinent was a wasteland of sand and rock, baking under the sun by day and freezing at night. Few organisms could survive in such harsh conditions. Life hugged the coastlines and river valleys, leaving the continental interior largely empty. The assembly of Pangaea reduced the total length of coastline around the world. Shallow coastal waters, which support much of marine biodiversity, became scarcer. Ocean circulation patterns changed as seaways closed and new barriers formed. These changes stressed marine ecosystems, contributing to the extinctions that would follow. The geography of the continents shapes the possibilities for life, and Pangaea's configuration was challenging for many species. The Permian period, from about 299 to 252 million years ago, was the final chapter of the Paleozoic era. Reptiles diversified and became the dominant land animals, developing a variety of body plans and ecological roles. Some, like the sail-backed Dimetrodon, were apex predators of their time. Others were herbivores, feeding on the ferns and seed plants that covered the Permian landscape. The world was changing, moving toward a new order. Dimetrodon is often mistaken for a dinosaur, but it was actually more closely related to mammals. It belonged to a group called synapsids, which would eventually give rise to the mammals. The sail on its back, supported by elongated spinal bones, may have helped regulate body temperature, absorbing heat from the morning sun, or radiating excess heat during the day. Dimetrodon went extinct millions of years before the first dinosaurs appeared. The Permian world was dominated by synapsids, our distant relatives in the mammalian lineage. Some were small insectivores, others were large predators or herbivores. The therapsids, a subgroup of synapsids, became increasingly mammal-like over time, developing differentiated teeth, upright postures, and possibly warm blood. If the Permian had ended differently, the age of mammals might have begun 200 million years earlier than it did. But the Permian did not end well. The formation of Pangaea contributed to one of the most severe mass extinctions in Earth's history, the Great Dying at the end of the Permian period, approximately 252 million years ago. Up to 96% of all marine species and 70% of land vertebrate species disappeared. The causes were probably multiple and interrelated, a perfect storm of catastrophe that nearly ended complex life on Earth. The Siberian Traps, a massive volcanic province, were responsible for much of the Permian extinction. Over the course of roughly 1 million years, eruptions covered an area larger than Western Europe, with layer upon layer of lava. The total volume of rock ejected was staggering, enough to bury the entire planet under several meters of basalt. But it was not the lava itself that caused the extinction. It was what the volcanoes released into the air. The eruptions pumped enormous quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, warming the planet by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. This rapid warming disrupted ecosystems around the world. But the volcanoes also released sulfur dioxide, which combined with water to form acid rain. They may have ignited coal deposits and organic-rich sediments, adding even more carbon dioxide and toxic gases to the air. The atmosphere became a chemical weapon turned against life itself. Methane trapped in ocean sediments may have been released as the seas warmed, adding to the greenhouse effect. Methane is a potent greenhouse gas, far more effective at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. Its release could have pushed temperatures even higher, triggering more methane release in a runaway feedback loop. The oceans warmed from top to bottom, disrupting circulation patterns and depleting oxygen in deep waters. The oceans became stratified and anoxic, meaning that oxygen levels in deep water dropped to near zero. Marine life that depended on oxygen suffocated. The anoxic conditions also allowed certain bacteria to thrive, producing hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs and is toxic to most life. Some scientists believe that hydrogen sulfide may have bubbled up from the oceans and poisoned land animals as well, though this remains debated. The result was a world so hostile that recovery took millions of years. The Great Dying was the closest life has ever come to complete extinction. Entire ecosystems collapsed, food webs disintegrated, the survivors inherited a devastated planet, one where the rules of existence had been rewritten. Yet from this catastrophe, new lineages would emerge and eventually flourish. Life found a way, as it always has. The survivors of the Permian extinction inherited a devastated world, but also one full of empty ecological niches waiting to be filled. The Triassic period that followed saw the rise of new groups that would dominate for the next 180 million years. Among these were the archosaurs, the lineage that would give rise to dinosaurs, crocodilians, and eventually birds. Early archosaurs were modest creatures, but they carried the potential for greatness. The Triassic world was warm and dry, with large deserts covering much of Pangaea's interior. The poles were ice-free, and tropical conditions extended far beyond their modern limits. Conifers and other gymnosperms dominated the plant life, since flowering plants had not yet evolved. The forests were green but different, lacking the diversity of flowers and fruits that would characterize later periods. The first dinosaurs appeared approximately 245 to 230 million years ago, during the Middle to Late Triassic. Early species like Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus were modest creatures, about the size of a dog, walking on two legs and probably eating a variety of small animals and plants. They shared the world with many other reptile groups and showed no obvious signs that they would become the dominant land animals for the next 160 million years. Eoraptor, whose name means dawn thief, was discovered in Argentina in 1991. It was a small, lightly built predator with sharp teeth and grasping hands. Eoraptor was not specialized like later dinosaurs, possessing a mix of features that make it difficult to classify precisely. It may represent something close to the common ancestor of all dinosaurs, a starting point from which the great diversity of later forms would emerge. The Triassic was a time of experimentation, with many different reptile groups competing for dominance. Rauisuchians were large predators that walked on four legs and resembled crocodiles more than dinosaurs. Etosaurs were armored herbivores covered in bony plates. Pterosaurs took to the air, becoming the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight. The world was full of possibilities, and evolution was testing them all. Pterosaurs were not dinosaurs, but close relatives that evolved flight independently. The earliest pterosaurs appeared in the late Triassic, small creatures with wingspans of perhaps a meter or less. Their wings were formed by a membrane of skin stretched between an enormously elongated fourth finger and the body. Over time, pterosaurs would evolve into a remarkable variety of forms, from sparrow-sized species to giants with wingspans exceeding 10 meters. Another mass extinction at the end of the Triassic, about 201 million years ago, cleared the way for dinosaurs to rise to dominance. Many competing reptile groups disappeared, leaving ecological vacancies that dinosaurs quickly filled. The cause of this extinction may have been volcanic activity associated with the breakup of Pangaea, which was beginning to rift apart. Massive eruptions created the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. Dinosaurs survived the end Triassic extinction and emerged into the Jurassic period as the rulers of the land. Why they survived while so many others perished remains unclear. Perhaps their upright posture gave them an advantage in a changing world. Perhaps they were simply lucky, in the right place at the right time. Whatever the reason, the Jurassic would belong to the dinosaurs. Pangaea began to break apart during the Triassic and continued fragmenting throughout the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods. The Atlantic Ocean opened as North America pulled away from Europe and Africa. India broke free and began its long journey northward, eventually colliding with Asia to raise the Himalayas. Australia and Antarctica separated, and the continents slowly drifted toward their current positions. The breakup of Pangaea had profound effects on evolution. Populations that had been connected became isolated, evolving independently on different landmasses. New ocean currents formed, altering climate patterns around the world. The diversity of habitats increased as coastlines lengthened and new mountain ranges rose. The modern geography of the Earth began to take shape, though the process would continue for over 200 million years. The Jurassic period, from about 201 to 145 million years ago, was the height of dinosaur diversity and dominance. The world was warm and lush, with forests extending into polar regions and shallow seas covering much of the continental interiors. Dinosaurs filled nearly every ecological niche on land, from tiny insectivores to the largest animals ever to walk the earth. Sauropods like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus reached lengths of over 30 meters and weights of 50 tons or more, the largest animals ever to walk on land. These gentle giants moved on 4 pillar-like legs, their long necks allowing them to reach vegetation that other herbivores could not access. Their tails stretched behind them like enormous counterweights, balancing their massive frames. A single sauropod could eat hundreds of pounds of plant material every day. The secret to sauropod size was their unique respiratory system, inherited from their archosaur ancestors and shared with birds. Unlike mammals, which breathe in and out through the same passages, sauropods had a system of air sacs that allowed air to flow through their lungs in a continuous one-way stream. This made their breathing far more efficient, supplying the oxygen needed to fuel their enormous bodies. Sauropod bones were often hollow or filled with air sacs, reducing their weight without sacrificing strength. This pneumatic skeleton was another adaptation that made giant size possible. The bones were still massive by any ordinary standard, but they were lighter than solid bones of the same size would have been. Evolution had found a way to build giants without making them too heavy to move. Theropods like Allosaurus were fearsome predators, hunting in packs or ambushing prey. Allosaurus was the apex predator of late Jurassic North America, reaching lengths of over 9 meters. Its skull was equipped with dozens of serrated teeth, designed to slice through flesh. Its arms were short but powerful, tipped with sharp claws. Allosaurus fossil sites sometimes contain the bones of multiple individuals, suggesting they may have hunted or at least fed together. Not all theropods were giant predators. Many were small, nimble creatures that hunted insects, lizards, and small mammals. Some evolved into omnivores or even herbivores, their teeth and digestive systems adapting to new diets. The theropod body plan proved remarkably versatile, giving rise to an enormous range of forms and lifestyles over the course of the Mesozoic. Stegosaurus carried rows of bony plates along its back and sharp spikes on its tail. The function of the plates has been debated for over a century. They may have been used for thermoregulation, absorbing heat from the sun, or radiating excess warmth. They may have been displays, used to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Or they may have served both purposes, as many biological structures do. The tail spikes, however, were clearly weapons, capable of inflicting serious wounds on any predator foolish enough to attack. The skies were filled with pterosaurs during the Jurassic, flying reptiles that ranged from sparrow-sized to creatures with wingspans exceeding 7 meters. Pterosaurs were not dinosaurs but close relatives, part of the archosaur family tree. They were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, beating their wings to travel long distances. Their hollow bones and efficient respiratory systems made flight possible, despite their sometimes enormous sizes. The oceans of the Jurassic teemed with marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs resembled dolphins in their body plan, though they were not closely related. Their streamlined bodies and powerful tails made them fast swimmers, capable of chasing down fish and squid. Plesiosaurs had long necks and paddle-like flippers, cruising through the water like underwater giraffes. Pliosaurs were shorter-necked, but more powerfully built, apex predators that could tackle almost any prey. The first birds evolved during the Jurassic, descended from small feathered theropod dinosaurs. Archaeopteryx, perhaps the most famous transitional fossil, lived about 150 million years ago in what is now Germany. It had feathers and wings like a bird, but also teeth, clawed fingers, and a bony tail like a dinosaur. Archaeopteryx could probably fly, though perhaps not as well as modern birds. It represents a snapshot of evolution in progress. Feathers did not evolve for flight. They first appeared in dinosaurs long before any of them could fly, probably serving as insulation or display. Many theropod dinosaurs were covered in feathers, from small raptors to possibly even Tyrannosaurus rex. The feathers of flight-capable birds evolved from these earlier structures, modified over millions of years, into the aerodynamic surfaces we see today. Birds are not merely descended from dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, the only lineage to survive the extinction that ended the reign of their giant relatives. The Cretaceous period, which lasted from about 145 to 66 million years ago, was the final and longest chapter of the age of dinosaurs. The continents continued to drift apart, and the Atlantic Ocean widened. Sea levels were higher than today, and shallow seas covered much of the continental interiors. The climate was warm, with no ice at the poles and tropical forests extending into what are now temperate regions. Flowers first appeared in the fossil record during the Cretaceous period. The earliest flowering plants, or angiosperms, were probably small and inconspicuous, but they diversified rapidly and began to dominate many environments. The coevolution of flowers and their pollinators, especially insects, created some of the most intimate partnerships in the history of life. Bees, butterflies, and beetles evolved alongside the flowers they visited, each shaping the evolution of the other. The spread of flowering plants transformed terrestrial ecosystems. Forests became more diverse, with new types of trees and understory plants. Fruits and seeds provided new food sources for animals, driving the evolution of new feeding strategies. The world became more colorful as flowers evolved to attract pollinators with bright petals and sweet nectar. The Cretaceous landscape would have looked more familiar to modern eyes than any that came before. Dinosaurs continued to thrive and diversify during the Cretaceous. Tyrannosaurus rex appeared in the final few million years, prowling the forests of North America. This iconic predator reached lengths of over 12 meters and weights of perhaps 9 tons, making it one of the largest land predators ever to exist. Its skull was massive, its jaws lined with teeth the size of bananas, its bite force strong enough to crush bone. Tyrannosaurus rex has been studied more intensively than almost any other dinosaur. Its tiny arms, so often the subject of jokes, were actually quite strong, capable of lifting several hundred pounds. Its eyes faced forward, giving it binocular vision and excellent depth perception, useful for judging distances when attacking prey. Its brain was relatively large for a dinosaur, suggesting intelligence beyond what we might expect from a reptile. T-Rex was a sophisticated predator, finely tuned by millions of years of evolution. Triceratops used its horns and frill to defend against predators like Tyrannosaurus. The two species lived at the same time and place, and fossils show evidence of conflict between them. Triceratops' skulls sometimes bear healed bite marks that match Tyrannosaurus' teeth. The horns of Triceratops were not just for defense. They were probably also used in competition with other Triceratops, locked together in shoving matches like modern deer or cattle. Hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs, were among the most successful herbivores of the Cretaceous. Their broad, flattened snouts allowed them to crop vegetation efficiently, and their batteries of constantly replacing teeth could grind even the toughest plant material. Some hadrosaurs had elaborate crests on their heads, hollow structures that may have been used to produce sounds for communication. A Cretaceous forest may have echoed with the honks and bellows of these social animals. In the southern hemisphere, titanosaur sauropods reached enormous sizes, rivaling or exceeding their Jurassic predecessors. Argentinosaurus may have weighed over 70 tons, making it one of the heaviest land animals ever to exist. These giants continued the sauropod tradition of extreme size, their long necks and tails giving them access to food sources beyond the reach of other herbivores. Even as the age of dinosaurs drew to a close, evolution continued to push the boundaries of what was possible. Velociraptors were actually much smaller than their portrayal in popular films, about the size of a turkey. They were covered in feathers and probably hunted small prey, using their famous sickle-shaped claws to pin down victims rather than slash them open as often depicted. Deinonychus, a larger relative, was probably the inspiration for the oversized movie raptors. Both were intelligent, agile predators, well adapted to their ecological roles. Spinosaurus may have been the largest carnivorous dinosaur, even larger than Tyrannosaurus, though the two lived on different continents and never encountered each other. Spinosaurus had an enormous sail on its back, formed by elongated spinal bones, and a crocodile-like snout suited for catching fish. Recent discoveries suggest it may have been semi-aquatic, spending much of its time in water, the first known swimming dinosaur. Mammals had been present since the Triassic, but throughout the age of dinosaurs they remained small and mostly nocturnal, hiding in the shadows of their giant neighbors. The largest mammals of the Mesozoic were about the size of a badger. Most were far smaller, filling ecological roles similar to modern shrews, mice, and opossums. They could not compete directly with dinosaurs, but they survived, biding their time in the undergrowth. Their patience would eventually be rewarded. The nocturnal lifestyle of Mesozoic mammals may have left lasting marks on our biology. Most mammals have excellent night vision and a keen sense of smell, adaptations useful for creatures that were active in darkness. The color vision of most mammals is limited compared to birds and reptiles, perhaps because color is less useful at night. We are descended from survivors who learned to see in the dark. Some Mesozoic mammals were more adventurous than the typical shrew-like forms. Castorocauda resembled a small otter and was adapted for swimming. Volaticotherium had a membrane between its legs that allowed it to glide from tree to tree. Reponomamus was large enough to eat baby dinosaurs, as evidenced by fossil stomach contents. Mammals were exploring a variety of lifestyles, even during the age of dinosaurs, though none could challenge the giants directly. The Cretaceous period ended with the most famous mass extinction of all, triggered by an asteroid impact 66 million years ago. The asteroid, approximately 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter, struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, creating the Chicxulub crater. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs, instantly vaporizing the asteroid and a vast quantity of rock, sending debris into the atmosphere and triggering earthquakes, tsunamis, and wildfires around the globe. The Chicxulub impact was not discovered until the 1990s, though its effects had been suspected for over a decade. Geologists found a thin layer of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids, in rocks marking the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods. This iridium layer has been found at hundreds of sites around the world, always at exactly the same point in the geological record. Something had delivered a pulse of extraterrestrial material to the entire planet at once. The crater itself was eventually identified beneath the Yucatan Peninsula, buried under younger sediments. It is about 180 kilometers in diameter and shows the characteristic features of a large impact, including a ring of mountains created by the rebounding Earth and shocked minerals that could only form under extreme pressure. The Chicxulub crater is the smoking gun that proves the asteroid hypothesis. The immediate aftermath of the impact was catastrophic. The energy of the collision vaporized rock and water, creating a fireball that rose high into the atmosphere. Re-entering debris heated the air so intensely that it may have ignited wildfires across entire continents. Temperatures at ground level may have briefly risen enough to cook any animal caught in the open. Those that survived the initial minutes faced worse to come. Dust and debris blocked sunlight for months, collapsing food chains as photosynthesis ground to a halt. Temperatures first spiked from the heat of re-entering debris, then plummeted as darkness settled over the planet. Acid rain fell from skies filled with sulfur compounds released by the impact. The seas became acidic as carbon dioxide levels rose. When the dust finally cleared, about 75% of all species had vanished, including all non-avian dinosaurs. The age of reptilian giants was over. The extinction was not instantaneous, but played out over years or perhaps decades. Some species may have died immediately from the heat and blast effects. Others starved as plants died and food webs collapsed. The largest animals, with their greater food requirements, were especially vulnerable. Small, adaptable creatures with varied diets had the best chance of survival. The world that emerged from the darkness was unrecognizable. Some scientists argue that the dinosaurs were already declining before the asteroid struck. Volcanic activity in what is now India, the Deccan Traps, was releasing enormous quantities of gas into the atmosphere throughout the final million years of the Cretaceous. This volcanism may have stressed ecosystems and reduced dinosaur diversity, making them more vulnerable when the asteroid arrived. The impact may have been the final blow to a dynasty already weakened by other factors. Yet the asteroid remains the primary cause of the extinction. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. The Deccan volcanism had been ongoing for hundreds of thousands of years without causing a mass extinction. It was the asteroid that pushed the system past its breaking point, triggering a cascade of catastrophes that the dinosaurs could not survive. The rock from space ended 160 million years of dinosaur dominance in a single terrible day. Not everything died. Birds survived, the descendants of small feathered dinosaurs that somehow made it through the crisis. Crocodilians survived in their freshwater refuges. Turtles, snakes, and lizards emerged into the New World. Small mammals that could burrow underground or eat seeds and insects found enough food to persist. The survivors were the founders of a new era, one that would eventually lead to the world we know. The extinction of the dinosaurs opened the door for mammals. With their competitors gone, mammals diversified rapidly during the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, filling ecological niches that had been occupied by dinosaurs for over 160 million years. Within 10 million years, mammals had evolved into a stunning variety of forms, from tiny insect eaters to large herbivores and formidable predators. The age of mammals had begun. Early mammals after the extinction included some truly bizarre forms. The Paleocene and Eocene epochs were a time of experimentation, as mammals explored body plans and lifestyles that had been off-limits during the age of dinosaurs. Without giant reptiles dominating every ecological niche, mammals were free to evolve in new directions. The results were often strange by modern standards. Titanoides was a Paleocene predator that looked like a cross between a wolf and a bear, but was only distantly related to either. It was part of a group called pantodonts, early mammals that filled large herbivore and omnivore niches before being replaced by more familiar groups. Titanoides had powerful jaws and claws, suggesting a varied diet that might have included both plants and animals. It was one of many evolutionary experiments that would leave no living descendants. The climate of the early Cenozoic era was generally warmer than today. Palm trees grew in Alaska, and crocodiles lived above the Arctic Circle. The poles were ice-free, and tropical forests extended far beyond their modern limits. This warmth was partly a legacy of the high carbon dioxide levels at the end of the Cretaceous, though the impact winter had temporarily cooled the planet. Within a few million years, the Earth had warmed again, entering one of the warmest periods in the last 100 million years. Approximately 55.5 million years ago, a spike in temperature called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum pushed global temperatures even higher. Over just a few thousand years, average temperatures rose by 5 to 8 degrees Celsius. The cause was probably a massive release of carbon, perhaps from methane hydrates on the seafloor or from volcanic activity. Ocean chemistry changed dramatically, causing extinctions among deep-sea organisms. The PETM is studied today as an analog for modern climate change. During the PETM, mammals shrank. The fossil record shows that many lineages evolved smaller body sizes during the thermal maximum, probably because smaller animals cope better with heat and can survive on less food. When temperatures eventually declined, body sizes increased again. This pattern has been repeated several times in Earth's history, suggesting a fundamental relationship between climate and animal size. The Eocene epoch saw the emergence of many familiar mammal groups. Early horses appeared, though they were small, dog-sized creatures with multiple toes rather than single hooves. Early whales took their first steps back into the sea, descended from land-dwelling ancestors that had returned to the water. Early primates climbed through tropical forests, their grasping hands and forward-facing eyes, adaptations for life in the trees. Whales evolved from land-dwelling mammals that returned to the sea approximately 50 million years ago. The transition from land to water is documented by a remarkable series of fossils. Pachycetus was a wolf-like animal that spent time in shallow water. Ambulocetus could walk on land, but also swam using its powerful tail. Rhodhocetus had shorter legs and a more streamlined body. Basilosaurus was fully aquatic, its hind legs reduced to tiny vestiges hidden within its body. The evolution of whales is one of the best documented examples of a major evolutionary transition. Each stage is represented by fossils showing intermediate features, from four-legged land animals to the fully aquatic giants we know today. The front legs became flippers, the hind legs disappeared, and the tail evolved into a powerful horizontal fluke. The nostrils migrated from the front of the snout to the top of the head, becoming the blowhole. Inside the bodies of modern whales, tiny bones remain as relics of their terrestrial ancestors. Bats appeared in the Eocene, the only mammals to achieve true powered flight. The oldest known bat fossils are already fully capable of flight, with elongated fingers supporting membranous wings. How bats evolved flight remains somewhat mysterious, since no intermediate forms have been found. They may have evolved from gliding ancestors, like modern flying squirrels, though no such fossils have been discovered. Once airborne, bats diversified rapidly, eventually becoming one of the most successful mammal groups. Giant ground sloths evolved in South America, eventually reaching the size of elephants. Megatherium could stand over 6 meters tall when reared up on its hind legs, making it one of the largest land mammals ever to exist. These gentle giants were herbivores, using their massive claws to pull down branches and strip leaves. They would eventually spread to North America after the land bridge formed, only to go extinct within the last 10,000 years. South America was an island continent for most of the Cenozoic, isolated from other land masses and evolving its own unique fauna. Marsupials diversified into forms that paralleled placental mammals on other continents, including saber-toothed predators and horse-like grazers. Giant, flightless birds called terror birds were the apex predators for millions of years, some standing over 3 meters tall. This isolation would end when the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea. Australia followed a similar path of isolated evolution. Marsupials dominated, evolving into kangaroos, koalas, wombats, and the carnivorous thylacine. Giant forms emerged there as well, including Diprotodon, a wombat relative the size of a hippopotamus. The unique fauna of Australia today is a remnant of this long isolation, a window into an alternative evolutionary history. The climate began to cool around 34 million years ago, as ice sheets started forming on Antarctica. This was the beginning of the current icehouse period, a time of generally cool climate, punctuated by cycles of glaciation. The formation of Antarctic ice was probably triggered by changes in ocean circulation, as Australia and South America separated from Antarctica, allowing a cold current to isolate the southern continent from warmer waters to the north. Antarctica has remained frozen ever since. The Antarctic circumpolar current, which flows around Antarctica from west to east, is the strongest ocean current on Earth. By isolating Antarctica from warmer waters to the north, it keeps the continent locked in ice. The formation of this current was a turning point in Earth's climate history, beginning the long cooling trend that would eventually lead to the ice ages. Geography shapes climate in profound ways. Grasslands expanded during the Miocene epoch, from about 23 to 5 million years ago, transforming landscapes on many continents. Grasses had evolved earlier, but they now spread across regions that had been forested, perhaps in response to drier climate and increased fire frequency. The spread of grasslands drove the evolution of grazing mammals, including the ancestors of modern horses, cattle, and antelopes. Horses evolved in North America over tens of millions of years. Early horses like Eohippus were small, multi-toed browsers that lived in forests. As grasslands spread, horses evolved larger bodies, longer legs, and single hooves adapted for running on hard ground. Their teeth became taller and more complex, suited for grinding tough grass. This evolutionary journey is documented by one of the most complete fossil sequences known for any mammal. The evolution of grass was itself a remarkable innovation. Grasses grow from the base rather than the tips of their leaves, allowing them to survive grazing and fire. They have silica in their leaves, which wears down the teeth of animals that eat them, driving the evolution of ever higher and harder teeth in grazers. The grasslands that now cover much of the Earth are a relatively recent development, changing the planet's face within the last 20 million years. Elephants and their relatives, the proboscideans, evolved in Africa and spread across the world. Mastodons, mammoths, and gomphotheras colonized every continent except Australia and Antarctica. These intelligent social animals became keystone species in many ecosystems, their feeding habits shaping the vegetation around them. The diversity of proboscideans has dwindled dramatically in recent times, leaving only 3 species of elephant today. Mammoths were adapted to cold climates, with thick fur, small ears, and layers of fat for insulation. Woolly mammoths roamed the cold grasslands of the Pleistocene, their long, curved tusks perhaps used for sweeping snow away from vegetation. They coexisted with early humans for tens of thousands of years, depicted in cave paintings and hunted for food and ivory. The last mammoths survived on isolated islands until about 4,000 years ago, long after the pyramids were built. The Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea approximately 3 million years ago, connecting North and South America for the first time in many millions of years. This land bridge allowed animals to migrate between the continents in what is called the Great American Interchange. Armadillos, opossums, and ground sloths moved north. Dogs, cats, horses, and elephants moved south. The mixing of these long-separated faunas transformed ecosystems on both continents. The Great American Interchange had winners and losers. North American predators proved more effective than their South American counterparts, and many South American carnivores went extinct. The terror birds that had ruled South America for millions of years could not compete with wolves, bears, and big cats. On the other hand, some South American species thrived in North America, including armadillos and opossums that still live there today. The genus Homo, which includes modern humans and our closest extinct relatives, first appeared approximately 2.5 to 2 million years ago in Africa. Our ancestors were not the dominant animals of their time. They were relatively rare primates living in a world of large predators and formidable herbivores. They made simple stone tools, walked upright, and had brains larger than those of earlier hominins, but much smaller than modern humans. Homo erectus was one of the most successful human species, surviving for nearly 2 million years. They were the first hominins to leave Africa, spreading across Asia and possibly into Europe. They controlled fire, made sophisticated stone tools, and may have been capable of language or proto-language. Homo erectus populations persisted in some regions until perhaps 100,000 years ago, overlapping with modern humans for tens of thousands of years. The human brain tripled in size over the last 2 million years, one of the most rapid increases in brain size known in evolutionary history. This expansion required enormous amounts of energy. Since the brain consumes about 20% of our calories, despite being only 2% of our body weight. The benefits must have been substantial, though exactly what drove this expansion remains debated. Tool use, social complexity, language and hunting strategies may all have played a role. Ice ages intensified during the Pleistocene epoch, which began about 2.6 million years ago. Glaciers advanced and retreated in cycles lasting tens of thousands of years, driven by subtle variations in Earth's orbit around the Sun. These Milankovitch cycles alter the distribution of sunlight across the planet, triggering feedback loops that amplify small changes into major climate shifts. The ice ages were not constant cold, but alternating periods of glaciation and relative warmth. At glacial maxima, ice sheets several kilometers thick covered much of North America and Europe. The Laurentide ice sheet reached as far south as present-day New York and Chicago. The weight of the ice depressed the land beneath it, and even today, thousands of years after the ice melted, regions like Scandinavia are still slowly rebounding. Sea levels dropped over 100 meters as water was locked up in ice, exposing land bridges between continents. The exposed land bridges allowed animals and humans to spread to new territories. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to North America, allowing mammoths, bison, and eventually humans to cross into the Americas. Britain was connected to continental Europe, and Australia was joined to New Guinea. The geography of the ice ages was very different from today, with coastlines, rivers, and ecosystems transformed by the presence of vast ice sheets. The Pleistocene was a time of giant animals, a megafauna that included mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and many others. These animals had evolved during millions of years of cooling climate and were well adapted to the harsh conditions of the ice ages. They coexisted with early humans and left their mark on the landscape in ways that are still visible today. Saber-toothed cats were among the most fearsome predators of the Pleistocene. Smilodon, the best-known genus, had canine teeth up to 28 centimeters long, far longer than any modern cat. These teeth were probably used to deliver killing bites to large prey, slicing through the thick hides of mammoths and ground sloths. Smilodon was a powerful, heavily built predator, more like a bear than a modern lion in its proportions. The dire wolf was larger than any modern wolf, with a more robust skull and stronger bite force. Thousands of dire wolf fossils have been recovered from the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, where they became trapped while hunting other animals mired in the sticky asphalt. Dire wolves were social predators, probably hunting in packs like modern wolves. They went extinct around 13,000 years ago, possibly due to competition with humans or climate change. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa approximately 300,000 years ago. For most of that time, they remained confined to that continent, developing technologies and cultures while Neanderthals and other human species occupied Europe and Asia. Our species was not alone in the world. We shared the planet with other kinds of humans, some of whom we would eventually meet, interact with, and absorb into our lineage. Neanderthals were our closest relatives, a species adapted to the cold climates of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia. They had larger brains than modern humans, robust bodies, and sophisticated stone tools. They buried their dead, cared for injured members of their groups, and may have had language. When modern humans expanded into Neanderthal territory, the two species interbred. Most people of European and Asian descent carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA today. The Denisovans were another human species, known primarily from a few bone fragments and teeth found in a cave in Siberia. DNA analysis revealed they were distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans, though closely related to Neanderthals. Modern humans interbred with Denisovans as well, and their genetic legacy survives in some human populations today, particularly in Melanesia and Australia. We are a hybrid species, carrying the genes of multiple human lineages. Beginning perhaps 70,000 years ago, modern humans began to spread beyond Africa, eventually reaching every continent except Antarctica. This expansion was one of the most consequential events in Earth's history. Humans carried with them technologies, languages, and cultures that would transform the planet. No other species had ever colonized so many different environments, from tropical forests to Arctic tundra, from coastal shores to high mountain ranges. As humans spread across the globe, megafauna began to disappear. In Australia, giant wombats, marsupial lions, and enormous flightless birds vanished around 46,000 years ago, shortly after humans arrived. In the Americas, mammoths, mastodons, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and dozens of other large mammals disappeared between about 13,000 and 11,000 years ago, coinciding with human expansion. The pattern of extinction following human arrival is striking and difficult to dismiss. Whether hunting, climate change, or both were responsible for the megafaunal extinctions remains debated. The end of the last ice age brought rapid environmental changes that stressed animal populations. But similar climate changes had occurred many times before without causing mass extinction. The new factor was humans, with their hunting technologies, their fire, and their ability to adapt to any environment. The combination of climate change and human pressure may have been more than the megafauna could survive. The last ice age ended approximately 11,700 years ago, marking the beginning of the Holocene epoch, the current geological time period. As glaciers retreated, sea levels rose and coastlines took their modern shapes. Forests spread back into regions that had been covered by ice or tundra. The climate stabilized into a warm, relatively predictable pattern that has persisted to the present day. The world, you know, is a child of this interglacial warmth. The stable, warm climate of the Holocene allowed human civilizations to develop. Agriculture became possible as wild plants and animals were domesticated. Populations grew and settled in permanent communities. Villages became towns, towns became cities, and cities became the centers of empires. Writing was invented, knowledge accumulated, and the pace of cultural change accelerated. In just 10,000 years, humans went from scattered bands of hunter-gatherers to a global civilization. Human agriculture began independently in several regions around the world between about 12,000 and 5,000 years ago. In the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, people domesticated wheat, barley, sheep, and goats. In China, rice and millet were cultivated. In Mesoamerica, corn, beans, and squash became staple crops. The ability to grow food rather than hunt and gather it allowed populations to increase dramatically, setting the stage for everything that followed. The domestication of animals transformed human society. Dogs were the first domesticated animals, perhaps joining human camps as long as 15,000 years ago. Sheep, goats, and cattle followed, providing meat, milk, wool, and labor. Horses revolutionized transportation and warfare. The relationship between humans and domesticated animals reshaped ecosystems around the world, as wild lands were converted to pastures and farmland. The impact of humans on Earth has accelerated dramatically in recent centuries. Since the Industrial Revolution began around 1750, burning fossil fuels has released vast quantities of carbon dioxide that had been locked away for hundreds of millions of years. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is now higher than at any time in at least 800,000 years. Global temperatures are rising, ice sheets are melting, and ecosystems are shifting. The Earth is entering a new chapter. Some scientists argue that we have entered a new geological epoch called the Anthropocene, the age of humans. The markers of this epoch would include the global dispersal of radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing, the spread of plastic particles through all environments, the mass extinction of species at rates not seen since the dinosaurs, and the rapid alteration of the atmosphere's composition. Future geologists, if there are any, would be able to identify the Anthropocene in the rock record. Humans have become a geological force, reshaping the planet more rapidly than many natural processes. We have moved more rock and sediment than all the world's rivers combined. We have altered the chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans. We have driven thousands of species to extinction and transformed nearly every ecosystem on Earth. No previous species has had such an impact on the planet, not even the cyanobacteria that oxygenated the atmosphere billions of years ago. Yet Earth has survived worse than this. It has been frozen solid from pole to pole and baked under a poisonous atmosphere. It has been bombarded by asteroids and torn by supervolcanoes. It has lost most of its species multiple times and recovered each time, filling the world again with new forms of life. The planet is resilient in ways that exceed our imagination. What is at risk is not the Earth itself, but the particular world we know, the world that has nurtured human civilization. The continents continue to drift, though too slowly for us to notice. The Atlantic Ocean widens by a few centimeters each year, while the Pacific slowly shrinks. In about 250 million years, the continents will likely merge again into a new supercontinent, sometimes called Pangaea Ultima or Nova Pangaea. The Atlantic Ocean will close as North America collides with Europe and Africa. Australia will merge with Southeast Asia. The configuration of land and sea will be utterly different from today. The sun is slowly brightening, as it has been since its birth. In about 1 billion years, it will be luminous enough to evaporate the oceans, ending the possibility of life as we know it on Earth's surface. The water that has sustained life for 4 billion years will escape into space, leaving behind a dry, barren world. Life might persist in deep underground refuges, but the surface will become as hostile as Venus. In about 5 billion years, the sun will exhaust the hydrogen fuel in its core and swell into a red giant, engulfing Mercury and Venus, and possibly reaching the orbit of Earth. Whether our planet is consumed or merely scorched, it will be rendered utterly lifeless. The story of Earth will end, as all stories must, though on a timescale beyond human comprehension. the planet that witnessed the first stirrings of life, will return to silence. But that distant fate lies far beyond any concern that need trouble you tonight. The Earth has been turning for 4.5 billion years, and will continue turning long after this moment passes. The ground beneath you holds layers of history beyond counting, each grain of soil a descendant of ancient mountains, each breath of air filtered through billions of years of life. You are part of this story, woven from the same atoms that once drifted in interstellar clouds. Tonight, as you rest, the planet continues its ancient rhythms. Somewhere, a volcano is building an island grain by grain. Somewhere, a river is carving a canyon deeper into the rock. Somewhere, tectonic plates are grinding past each other, storing energy for earthquakes that may not come for centuries. The Earth is alive in its own slow way, changing constantly on timescales we can barely perceive. The atoms in your body have been on a long journey. The hydrogen in your cells was forged in the Big Bang itself, nearly 14 billion years ago. The carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen were cooked in the hearts of ancient stars, scattered into space when those stars exploded, and gathered again into the cloud that became our solar system. The iron in your blood was created in supernovae, the most violent events in the universe. You are made of stardust that has been recycled through generations of stars and planets. You are connected to every living thing that has ever existed on this planet. The DNA in your cells uses the same genetic code as the first bacteria that swam in ancient seas. Your mitochondria are the descendants of free-living bacteria that gave up their independence billions of years ago. The calcium in your bones was once dissolved in primordial oceans. The breath you are taking now contains oxygen molecules that have been exhaled and inhaled by countless creatures over billions of years. The Earth has been patient through all its transformations, through fire and ice, through extinction and renewal. It has waited for continents to form, and mountains to rise and life to emerge from the waters. It has waited for fish to crawl onto land, and for forests to cover the continents, and for dinosaurs to rule and fall. It has waited for primates to descend from trees, and for humans to spread across every corner of the globe. It waits still, turning slowly through the dark. You are resting on a planet that has spent billions of years preparing for this moment. Every process that shaped the Earth, from the differentiation of its core, to the oxygenation of its atmosphere, to the evolution of complex life, has contributed to the world that now supports you. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, all are products of Earth's long history. You are held by a planet that has been practicing holding things for a very long time. So let your body relax now, settling into the gentle pull of gravity that has held you since you were born. Let your thoughts drift like continents, slowly and without urgency. The ancient rhythms of the Earth continue beneath you, the slow churn of the mantle, the drift of the magnetic poles, the patient accumulation of sediment on the ocean floor. The planet does not hurry, and neither do you need to hurry tonight. The story of Earth is not finished. New chapters are being written every day, in the evolution of species, in the movement of continents, in the slow changes of climate and sea level. Humans are part of that story now, for better or worse, shaping the planet in ways that will be visible in the rock record for millions of years to come. What we do with our time on this ancient world matters, though tonight you need not solve any problems or make any decisions. If you are still awake, you can go ahead and watch the next video now. But if your eyes are heavy and your thoughts are fading into the soft haze of rest, then simply let yourself drift. The story of Earth continues, with or without our attention, as it always has. The planet will keep turning, the stars will keep shining, and the slow processes that have shaped our world for billions of years will carry on their patient work. You are safe. You are held. You are part of something ancient and beautiful and ongoing. Sleep well, and good night.